Well, hello, Nativity Bibleheads. It is Dr. Wayne, and it is time for Sunday morning Power Bible Study. Today we've got David and Goliath. A psalm response to that out of Psalm 9. Another reading from 2 Corinthians, this time in chapter 6. And then we have Jesus' classic calming of the stormy sea in Mark chapter 4. Let's get to our first passage from the Hebrew Bible. The old David and Goliath story, 1 Samuel chapter 17. We're going to, our specific reading goes from the beginning of verse 1, and then it skips to verses 4 to 11, and then 19 to 23, and then 32 to 49. There's a lot of detail in this story, and one of the things that we got to keep in mind is that there were different. Anytime you have a story of something that happened a long time ago, what happens? You get a lot of different people's versions of it. And our biblical redactors, they didn't want to throw away anything. So they just put all of it in the stew. And so consequently, it creates sometimes a little convoluted mishmash. But we try to filter that out by not giving you everything. So here we go. Verse 1 of Samuel 17. The Philistines gathered their armies for battle. There were, who were the Philistines? They were the people on the sea. Remember that slice, that land bridge that Israel is, that coastal area was frequently inhabited by people that were not Israel. And the Philistines, actually, the word Philistine, that's how we get the name Palestine. Did you know that? For that area, even to this day. The Philistines and Israel's army, they were at loggerheads a lot, okay? And it's a little bit unclear as to whether or not the Israelites ever totally put down the Philistines, because they continued to be at loggerheads continuously. The Philistines gathered their armies for battle. Now, verse 4. And there came out from the camp of the Philistines a champion named Goliath of Gath. Gath was one of the Philistine cities on the coast, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. Okay, that's pretty tall. There's different. If you look at the Greek version of this account, it's not the same numbers here. 6 cubits in the span of like over 9 feet. The Hebrew version preserves that. The Greek version says it was 4 cubits in the span, which means about 6.5 feet tall. People weren't that tall back then, so consequently, you can be a giant if you were 6'6" back then. But anyway, this preserves the Hebrew, the Masoretic text. So it says 6 cubits in the span, which is like over 9 feet. He had a helmet of bronze on his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail. The weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of bronze. He had greaves of bronze on his legs and a javelin of bronze slung between his shoulders. The shaft of his spear was like a weaver's beam, which means it's like pretty thick, right? And his spear's head weighed 600 shekels of iron, and his shield bearer went before him. Now, this era of history, we're talking about right around like the 11th century in the Common Era, before the Common Era. The use of bronze was not something that everybody had. It was something that was out there. And if you knew how to use it well, you could actually give yourself military defenses and weapons that were superior. And that's one of the things that enabled some armies to be much more dominant in that time. And the degree to which a people became familiar with how to use this metal determined how successful they were in warfare. So the fact that we have all these details with regard to his armor and his weaponry illustrates the fact that there were discrepancies during that time with regard to what kind of weaponry everybody had available. He stood and shouted at the ranks of Israel. And here he goes. Why have you come out to draw up for battle? Am I not a Philistine? And are you not servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves and let him come down to me. If he is able to fight with me and kill me, then we will be your servants. And if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall be our servants and serve us. And the Philistine said, Today I defy the ranks of Israel. Give me a man that we may fight together. When Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. Bum, bum, bum. Yeah, so this kind of a trash talking, this like putting things out there, this is an ancient thing. It didn't get invented with with modern day professional wrestling, right? The World Wrestling Entertainment stuff that's going on. It didn't get invented now. It's something that goes way back, okay? Of like throwing that thing out there. And so this trash talk and the challenge to you. Now, Saul and they and all the men of Israel were in the valley of Elah fighting with the Philistines. This is just saying basically that where was Israel's army at this time? They were already engaged in battle, right? And so this challenge that comes forth presents a possibility to actually put an end to the battle, right? It's like, are we gonna bet it all on one number and we can actually end it right now, or should we risk the long game? So here, what happens? David rose early in the morning, left the sheep with a keeper, took the provisions, and went as Jesse had commanded him. Now, we skipped all this stuff about why was Jesse doing all this? Well, Jesse is getting him to the front to telling him to take some provisions, some food for his brothers. Jesse had 8 sons, and David was the 8th and the youngest, which we learned about that last week when he got anointed, right? He isn't a part of the military in this picture, right? He came to the encampment as the army was going forth to the battle line, shouting the war cry. Israel and the Philistines drew up for battle, army against army. David left the things in charge of the keeper of the baggage, ran to the ranks, and went and greeted his brothers. Now, he was not sent there on a military task. He was simply sent there as, he's the shepherd boy, he's the youngest of the 8, he's bringing provisions for his brothers who were there in the battle. As he talked with them, the champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, isn't it interesting how the way the narrative is talking, it's like reintroducing us to, or introducing, it's treating it as though we haven't heard of Gath or of this Goliath of Gath before. Remember, what we have here is a collation of more than one tradition, right? Goliath by name, came up out of the ranks of the Philistines and spoke the same words as before. And David heard him. So here's what happens. David actually hears these words, and what's going to happen? Now is when we skip to verse 32. David said to Saul, "Let no one's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine." When you say your servant to somebody who is like a king or something, it's a way of putting yourself down. It's just a way of referring to yourself when you're in the presence of royalty, right? So to say, let your servant go, it's to say, let me go, right? Let no one's heart fail because of him. Fear not, I will go fight. And Saul said to David, "You are not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for you are just a boy, and he has been a warrior from his youth." But David said to Saul, "Your servant I used to keep sheep for my father, and whenever a lion or a bear came and took a lamb from the flock, I went after it and struck down, rescuing the lamb from its mouth. And if it turned against me, I would catch it by the jaw, strike it down, and kill it. Your servant has killed both lions and bears. And so he's trying to sell Saul on the fact that even though he's been a shepherd, he's gotten pretty good with taking care of himself, especially with wild animals. And so he's just giving him his resume, like talking him into it, right? And this uncircumcised Philistine shall be like one of them. Yeah, one of these wild animals that he's killed, right? Since he has defied the armies of the living God. Notice how David's motivation is very much in the realm of defending God, right? And that's one. There's also a tradition in these stories that we're not getting, those verses where there was a prize, that he could actually marry into Saul's family. By the way, spoiler alert, David does do that. He does get to marry, I think, 2 of Saul's daughters as a result, but we don't get that line of logic in this iteration of the story. Since he has defied the armies of the living God. Yeah, notice how it's very important for our narrator that David's motivation be pure and theologically motivated. David said, "The Lord who saved me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear will save me from the hand of this Philistine." Oh, isn't he so awesome? He's just depending on God. We love this, right? So Saul said to David, "Go, and may the Lord be with you." Okay. Apparently, Saul was talked into it. We don't know why he was so easily swayed, but he was. Saul clothed David with his armor. Notice, so Saul is in this mode of warfare whereby he's like, okay, well, if you're going to go to battle, we need to give you all of the stuff you need to make sure that you're safe. Notice how Saul isn't picking up on the theological, divine motivation of David. No, he's still in that old way of thinking of like, well, we better get you armed up. We better make sure that because if you're gonna, you better make sure you have the right equipment, right? He put a bronze helmet on his head and clothed him with a coat of mail. David strapped Saul's sword over the armor, and he tried in vain to walk, for he was not used to them. Yeah, you got the picture. Kind of comical, right? Then David said to Saul, "I cannot walk with these, for I am not used to them." So notice how Saul doesn't protest. So David removed them. Then he took his staff in his hand, which is what he normally has when he's out doing his shepherding thing, right? And he chose 5 smooth stones from the wadi. The wadi is a dry lake bed. It's not a lake bed, a stream or a river, creek, that kind of thing. But back then they had the wet season and the dry season, and so it only had water during the wet season. And this is obviously it wasn't that wet season because that's when you call it the wadi, right? The wadi, and put them in his shepherd's bag in the pouch. His sling was in his hand, and he drew near to the Philistine. So he is going to battle with just his shepherding stuff, okay? One of the things we want to keep in mind is that this shepherd metaphor is descriptive of what the king was supposed to be for the people of Israel, all right? We know who David is to become, and it's important here that when he faces off against this Philistine, that he has the shepherding accoutrement with him, and not the military, because God was the one that was going to do the battle. He was just going to show up with who he was, which was the next king. The Philistine came on and drew near to David with his shield bearer in front of him. When the Philistine looked and saw David, he disdained him, for he was only a youth, ruddy and handsome in appearance. Remember how our narrator liked to say that about David in our reading from, I think, last week when he was ordained, or not ordained, but anointed by Samuel. The Philistine said to David, "Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks?" Notice how Goliath sees the shepherd's staff not as a tool that a shepherd would use, but as just a simple stick, right? He sees it as a weapon, right? And a shepherd's crook can be used as a weapon with sheep, because you would use them to push them and to whack them and to like pull them back, stuff like that. But this comment illustrates how Goliath was seeing David as coming to him in a militaristic way. And remember, David is taking the position of being the shepherd, and a shepherd has to do, brings his shepherd stuff with him, right? Exactly. And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. Yeah. The Philistine said to David, "Come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and to the wild animals of the field." This is what would happen if you get killed in the open field, right? In the open air. But David said to the Philistine, "You come to me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied." Notice the religious motivation. Isn't that great? "This very day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you down and cut off your head, and I will give the dead bodies of the Philistine army this very day to the birds of the air and to the wild animals of the earth, so that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, and that all this assembly may know that the Lord does not save by sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hand." Oh, this is big talk, right? This is all about that trash talk that goes on between warring sides, right? Now, the conclusion. When the Philistine drew nearer to meet David, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet the Philistine. David put his hand in his bag. Oh, it's like slow motion. Took out a stone, slung it, and struck the Philistine on his forehead. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell face down on the ground. Of course, the forehead is one of the few areas of the body that's protected, because you gotta be able to have some of your face be seen, right? They didn't have a full facial coverage. Why would you anyway? But anyway, the slingshot was an instrument of war. It predates, the use of. If you think about it, what does the gun do? A gun shoots something that would do the same type of thing. They didn't have the munitions and gunpowder back then, right? So consequently, how do you get something something small to hit? Well, that's what the slingshot's about. So consequently, this is a thing that was known in the world for the use in war, but it's not necessarily something that you would use unless you were pinpointing something specifically. It's not like the whole bunch of archers, shooting arrows up in the air to come down. No, this is something that's more a one-on-one type of munition, right? So that's the end of the story, right? The whole motivation we want to get is how God is the winner here. David is doing it for God, for the glory of God, for the glory of Israel. And we'll just have to stay tuned to see what does this forebode for him going forward, right? Bum, bum, bum. All right. Psalm 9 through 20 is a response to this story. We're only doing verses 9 through 20. Now, you know how sometimes in our Psalms we have ones that have an acrostic enumeration, right? Each line begins with a letter of the alphabet, of the Hebrew alphabet. And because of the fact that that's what they use as the organizing authority for structure for us, sometimes the thoughts aren't always consistent. Let's listen to this one. Verse 9 to 20. Psalm 9, verses 9 to 20. The Lord will be a refuge for the oppressed, a refuge in time of trouble. Those who know your name will put their trust in you, for you never forsake those who seek you, O Lord. This is a typical element of expressing a praise to God, of stating to God who God is, right? Since we're starting here with verse 9, we're getting it from the letter Vav, right? Aleph, Beit, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Vav. And then we have another entry from Zayin, Chet, Tet, Yod, and Kaf. Okay, those are the Hebrew. That's the section of the Hebrew alphabet that these strophes line up from. Sing praise to the Lord who dwells in Zion. Proclaim to the peoples the things he has done. The avenger of blood will remember them. He will not forget the cry of the afflicted. Now we get that's Hevav Zion. This is Chet now. Have pity on me, O Lord. See the misery I suffer from those who hate me. O you who lift me up from the gate of death, so that I may tell of all your praises and rejoice in your salvation in the gates of the city of Zion. A petition, right? Something we're used to seeing in the Psalms. Verses 15 and 16 are Tet, okay? We had Vav, Zion, Chet, and now Tet, verses 15 and 16. The ungodly have fallen into the pit they dug, and in the snare they set is their own foot caught. You kind of get the picture of this applying to the Philistines, right? The Lord is known by his acts of justice. The wicked are trapped in the works of their own hands. And now Yod, verse 17, the wicked shall be given over to the grave, and also all the peoples that forget God. Now, the last three verses are from the letter Kaf, right? So remember, it's an acrostic from this section of the Hebrew alphabet. Vav, Zayin, Chet, Tet, Yod, and Kaf. This is Kaf, last three verses. For the needy shall not always be forgotten, and the hope of the poor shall not perish forever. If you're familiar with your evening prayer, your morning prayer, this is a stanza in one of the versicles and responses in our prayer book. I don't know if you realize this or not, but the stuff we have in our Book of Common Prayer, we didn't just make it all up. It actually is being excised from Scripture. Rise up, O Lord, let not the ungodly have the upper hand. Let them be judged before you. Put fear upon them, O Lord. Let the ungodly know they are but mortal. Yeah, the Philistines are being cast here as the ungodly, obviously, and that's the context for which gave David his motivation, right, against Goliath. All right, we're moving on now. 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verses 1 through 13. This is, remember, Paul is doing a lot of defending himself. He's doing a lot of trying to explain why he does what he does. Here he is giving like a summary of his argument, right? 2 Corinthians 6, 1 through 13. As we work together with him, the word hymn is something that we don't necessarily have in the Greek, but we just say, as we work together. We urge you also not to accept the grace of God in vain. He had just been talking about, the benefits of the resurrection, the benefits of salvation and all of that. And his final urge starts with this kind of urging. For he says, notice it says, for he says, he's talking about in his quotations of the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible. As far as Paul is concerned, Jesus said it, okay? That's the way he was. Now, we know Jesus didn't say it, but that's the way he read. That was his hermeneutic for Scripture, right? For he says, at an acceptable time I have listened to you, and on a day of salvation I have helped you. See, now is the acceptable time. See, now is the day of salvation. Now, he's reaching a crescendo, okay, in his argument in the book, right? We are putting no obstacle in anyone's way so that no fault may be found with our ministry. Remember, he was defending it a lot. But as servants of God, we have commended ourselves in every way. And when he says commending ourselves, it's like we've given ourselves over to it. And here he's going to start listing a whole bunch of things, right? First, he's going to give us a catalog of afflictions that he's suffered. But as servants of God, we have commended ourselves in every way. Through what? Great endurance through great endurance in afflictions, hardships, calamities, beatings, imprisonments, riots, labors, sleepless nights, hunger, okay? These are all afflictions that he has suffered, and we're not going to go into it, but if you read him and his, especially in the book of Acts, we get a lot of narrative about how these conflicts arose. Now we're going to get a catalog of divinely empowered virtues, okay? So let's go back, okay? We have commended ourselves in every way through great endurance in afflictions, hardships, calamities, beatings, imprisonments, riots, labors, sleepless nights, hunger, and now the virtues. By purity, knowledge, patience, kindness, holiness of spirit, genuine love, truthful speech, and the power of God, with the weapons of righteousness for the right hand and for the left. It kind of does sound a little bit reminiscent of what we saw with our David and Goliath story, right? With the militaristic motif. Paul loves the militaristic motifs, and to say that you've got the weapons of righteousness in both hands means you are really armed for bear, okay? In honor and dishonor, in ill repute and good repute, these he's going to now get into some paired antitheses that tell us about the paradoxical nature of his apostolic work, right? In honor and dishonor, in ill repute and good repute. We are treated as impostors, but yet we are true. As unknown, and yet are well known. As dying, and see, we're alive. As punished, and yet not killed. As sorrowful, yet always rejoicing. As poor, yet making many rich. As having nothing, and yet possessing everything. So this paradoxical nature of his apostolic work is the paradigm for it is in the crucifixion and resurrection, right? That which something appears to be, it's not what it appears to be. The surface, what you see there, is not the full story, okay? We have spoken frankly to you, Corinthians. Our heart is wide open to you. This expression where it says, we have spoken frankly, literally, it is saying we're speaking with an open mouth. How do you like that? Our mouth is open. We have spoken frankly. Our mouth is open. You know how, like, when you start to mumble things, it's usually when you're trying to hide something. You want to say, you want to have the experience of saying it, but you don't want to be heard. Well, here he's saying, hey, we've let it all out. We've let it all out there. Our mouth is wide open. We have spoken frankly to you, Corinthians, and our heart is wide open to you. There is no restriction in our affections, but only in yours. It's not me, it's you. You're the problem here, okay? We haven't held back anything. You have. And he's saying it openly, right? In return, I speak as to children, open wide your hearts also. Notice this is the end of this appeal. This is where he shifts a little bit of his emphasis, but this is the conclusion of his emphasis on his apostolic work. In return, I speak to you, so open wide your hearts also. The picture of the open heart, quite a thing to take on, right? Good question for us to ask ourselves. How wide open is my heart on this? And when our heart is open, that's when we can actually start to experience what God gets to experience, and then we can actually start to act like God in our behavior. How about that? We're moving on. We got to go to the gospel. We are now in Mark chapter 4. We've been having in Mark's gospel a lot of stories of Jesus. Last week we had some parables. He's been doing some healings. He's done some good things that has produced resistance. The people love him, but the religious leaders are like, wait a second, what is this guy really trying to do? So here in chapter 4, verses 35 to 41, we get this classic scene of the stormy sea, okay? On that day, that doesn't really mean this. He just got done speaking with a whole lot of parables. That's what that day is about. When evening had come, he said to them, "Let us go across to the other side." Okay, when Jesus says go across the other side, he's talking about the lake that it's called the Sea of Galilee, right? In Mark, there is a lot of going back and forth the sea, and it's all about Jesus' inclusive ministry between the Jews and the Gentiles on the other side. So anytime he's going across, he's like saying, hey, this message that I've got for my peeps, I got to take it to the world. And he goes back and forth a lot. So crossing to the other side, and this is a metaphor for how the church then ends up spreading, right? Because of the fact that Jesus' emphasis was to be inclusive of the entire world and not to be just a something for a specific ethnic identity, right? Let us go across to the other side. And leaving the crowd behind, they took him with them in the boat, just as he was. So he said, let's go. And they're going, right? Other boats were with him. I don't know what the significance of that is, quite frankly. Maybe it'll come forth. I'm not so sure. A great windstorm arose, and the waves beat into the boat so that the boat was already being swamped. Here's one of the things we need to understand. Anytime we've got a scene on water, okay, anytime we have a scene on water in Scripture, the waters were seen as that area of the world where God was still battling forces that controlled it. It's like God didn't have total dominion over the sea. It's like that's the reason why they were a little scared of it, because it's almost as like the sea was controlled by demons. We've seen Jesus do demon exorcisms before now. But this actually, you'll see, is another exorcism because of the way he's going to talk to it. But this time it's not from exorcising a demon from a person, but it is from this body of water. A great windstorm arose, and the waves beat into the boat so that the boat was already being swamped. But he was in the stern, asleep on the cushion, and they woke him up and said to him. Now, the reason why Jesus is asleep is because for Jesus, remember, he is acting as the Son of God, and God is the one who created the universe, right? And you've got to remember back to the creation narrative. How did the world get created? Well, the chaos, the pre-existent chaos, got calmed, right? By saying, "Let there be light," and then putting dry land, and then portioning off the waters and such. Here, what we're going to see is him acting just as God did in creation. He was in the stern, asleep on the cushion. This is something I'm picking up on. Remember what God did on the seventh day in creation? He rested. He's resting. And they woke him up and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" He woke up and rebuked the wind. So they were not in the position of seeing him as the Son of God, and thereby imbued with the gifts of the Creator, right? But just as someone who was being nonchalant and uncaring, okay, like, "Oh, we need to be saved, we need your help," as opposed to the one who is the source of all of it, right? He woke up and rebuked the wind. This is a classic exorcism verb, okay, to rebuke the wind, and said to the sea, "Peace, be still," just like an exorcism. Then the wind ceased, and there was a dead calm. He said to them, "Why are you afraid? Have you still no faith?" And they were filled with great awe and said to one another, "Who then is this that even the wind and the sea obey him?" The question that they are asking is demonstrative of the fact that they are not picking up on the clues, that the answer to that unanswerable question for them is that this is the Son of God. The apostles, the disciples, never totally get that in the Gospel of Mark. That's the reason why it's the saddest of all the Gospels in terms of how it ends, in that Jesus wants them to meet back with them in Galilee, to inaugurate this new apocalyptic community of faith. It includes everyone, Jew and non-Jew alike, and they disband, they desert him. And that's the reason why we don't have the resurrection appearances in Mark's gospel, because the disciples gave up on him. And that's the reason why it's kind of like the saddest of all the gospels. So for them to say, "Who then is this that even the wind and the sea obey him?" We know the answer to that. In fact, at Jesus' crucifixion, at the end of the book, a Roman centurion actually says, as he witnesses Jesus dying, he says, "Surely this man was surely the Son of God." The disciples never picked up on that, okay? They just followed Jesus as somebody, a charismatic leader. They never totally got the totality of what Jesus was trying to put forth, or who he truly was, okay? That's what, so Mark's goal in his Christological presentation of who Jesus is to show him as Son of God. In this scene, then, we have him acting as God, doing exactly what Creator God would and only could, and nobody else could be able to have that kind of authority over the chaos, but the Creator himself. This is a part of Mark's presentation of who Jesus is. Okay, that is it. Until next week, Peace.